Today, we're tackling one of history's biggest and most complicated questions. How did World War II actually begin? Now, it's a story we all think we know, but the real causes, well, they're a lot more tangled than you might think. You see, the start of the deadliest conflict in human history wasn't just one single moment. It wasn't like flipping a switch. Nope, it was more like a chain reaction. A line of dominoes, each one tipping over the next. So today, let's trace that chain, event by event, and see exactly how the world tumbled into war.
So where does a chain reaction like this even start? Well, to find that first domino, we've got to go all the way back to the end of World War I. A peace treaty was signed, one that was supposed to guarantee peace forever. But, as we're about to see, it did the exact opposite.
Right, so our story really kicks off in 1919, in the famous Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. The treaty signed there officially ended the Great War, but for Germany, this wasn't a peace agreement, not at all. It was a national humiliation, and it planted a seed of bitterness that would poison the entire nation for the next 2 decades. And at the very heart of that treaty was Article 231, the infamous War Guilt Clause. Now, this wasn't just about pointing fingers. This clause forced Germany to take all the blame, and it became the legal justification for absolutely staggering financial penalties, reparations that were designed to completely cripple Germany's economy. And what was that price tag? A jaw-dropping $33 billion. To put that in perspective, that's over $270 billion in today's money. It was such a crushing debt that Germany only finished paying it off in 2010. Yeah, you heard that right, 2010. The economic fallout from this was, well, it was immediate and it was catastrophic. To even try to make these payments, the government just started printing more money, which led to insane hyperinflation. I mean, just to give you an idea of how bad it got, by 1923, a single loaf of bread cost 200 trillion German marks.
So you have this perfect storm, right? Economic collapse, national shame, and into this chaos steps a charismatic and incredibly dangerous politician, Adolf Hitler. He saw all the anger, all the despair, and he knew exactly how to use it to his advantage. Hitler's playbook was brutally simple and effective. He took all that anger over the treaty and gave people a target for their rage. He blamed internal enemies, Jewish people, socialists, anyone he could use as a scapegoat. And then he used powerful propaganda to sell a simple, intoxicating promise. I will restore German greatness. And just when you thought things couldn't get worse, boom, the Great Depression hits in 1929, pushing an already broken economy right over the edge. By 1933, 6 million Germans were unemployed. People were desperate. And in that desperation, Hitler's extremist promises started to sound pretty good. He was appointed chancellor, and just months later, he was a dictator.
Okay, so now he has absolute power. And what does he do? He immediately starts tearing up the Treaty of Versailles, piece by piece. He rebuilds Germany's military, he sets his sights on new territory. He was basically testing the other European powers, seeing just how far they would let him go. And the driving force behind this was this really toxic ideology he called Lebensraum, which literally means living space. This wasn't just about grabbing more land. It was a racist belief that the so-called Aryan race needed to expand, even if it meant conquering and dominating other people.
Now, you have to remember, European leaders were haunted by the memory of World War I. They would do almost anything to avoid another one. So they followed a policy of appeasement. They let Hitler annex Austria. Then they literally gave him a piece of Czechoslovakia, hoping that would be enough. But every time they gave in, it just made him bolder. So after swallowing up the rest of Czechoslovakia, Hitler turns his gaze to Poland. But before he could invade, he made a move that was so shocking, so cynical, it stunned the entire world and cleared his path for war.
And this was it. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Fascism and communism. These guys were supposed to be mortal enemies, right? But in August 1939, Hitler and Stalin signed a non-aggression pact. Publicly, it was about peace. Secretly, they had a plan to invade Poland and split it right down the middle.
And with his eastern flank totally secure thanks to that pact, Hitler didn't waste a single second. On September 1st, 1939, 1 million German soldiers poured into Poland. This was the final domino. It had fallen.
This was it, the line in the sand. Britain and France gave Hitler an ultimatum. Get out of Poland or it's war. Hitler just ignored them. And so 2 days later, they officially declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun.
But here's the strange thing.
The declaration of war didn't immediately start a huge fight. For months, there was this weird, quiet period people called the phony war. Well, that quiet was completely shattered in the spring of 1940, when Hitler unleashed a terrifying new military tactic on Europe.
The strategy was called Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, and it was the total opposite of the slow, grinding trench warfare from the First World War. Blitzkrieg was all about speed, surprise, and just overwhelming force. It was designed to win a war in days, not years.
So how did it work? It was basically a three-punch combo. First, panzer tanks would just smash through weak spots in the enemy lines. Then, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, would come in and bomb key targets. And finally, the infantry would just flood through the gap to surround the enemy. It all happened so fast, defending armies were often paralyzed before they could even react.
And you might be wondering, how did they keep up this insane pace? Well, they had a secret, a little pill. German soldiers were often given a drug called Pervitin, which we now know as crystal meth. It allowed them to fight for days on end without any sleep, pushing them way beyond normal human limits.
And the results were just devastating. Using this new strategy, Hitler's armies conquered Europe at a breathtaking speed. Denmark and Norway fell in April. In May, they swept into France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. By the end of June, France itself had surrendered.
By the summer of 1940, the situation looked absolutely dire. Hitler was the master of Western Europe, and only one nation, was left standing against him: Great Britain.
And in that darkest of hours, Britain's new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, stood up and rallied his nation with one of the most defiant speeches in history, vowing to fight on no matter what it cost.
You see, the fall of France wasn't the end of the war. It was really just the end of the beginning. The German war machine seemed completely unstoppable, which leaves us with the next massive question in this story. With an entire continent under his boot, how could Hitler possibly be defeated?